Jonathan Foremny is a professional Falcon test pilot with 4,238 total flight hours for his company, TCOM, which is located in Columbia, Maryland, and he is in the uncrewed division. His position has involved to heading regulatory and legal compliance as related to UA operations. In addition, he is an adjunct professor of commercial flight planning and management and a doctoral candidate focusing on investigating the societal and economic benefits of systematically operating under the rules-based rather than the waiver-based regulatory structure. Jonathan, you might be able to go into that in detail when you speak. Jonathan really began his foray into aviation industry by working with the FAA Beyond program before transitioning to the private sector, flying commercial UAV, uncrewed, of course, based out of Sioux Falls Regional Airport in South Dakota. In addition, he was the chief Part 107 instructor, which took him throughout the country from Jacksonville, Florida, to Oregon, to Anchorage, to Fairbanks, Alaska. Subsequently, Jonathan worked as a pilot manager out of KSFO, that's our San Francisco airport. Currently, Jonathan lives and works in the Chesapeake Bay area, just north of Washington, D.C., is designing and flying custom aircraft for a range of client operating in both private and public sectors. So what Jonathan and I really wanted to cover, and he's done, I believe, done such a great job, is the future of autonomous aerial vehicles and drone integration, navigating regulatory challenges in the drone industry, and building a future-proof business model in the drone industry. So Jonathan, please take it away.
Absolutely. So I'm going to try and share my screen with you all. All right. Thanks, John. Really appreciate the introduction there. I hope everyone is having a really wonderful evening and is getting as excited about Thanksgiving as I am. So John went into my background a little bit here, and I don't really want to get into a ton more of that, but I think there is one point that might be worth mentioning, and that is that I like to think of myself as having a relatively unbiased view of the aviation industry as a whole. So I have my hands in a number of really kind of seemingly disparate socioeconomic sectors that have managed to weave themselves into my life through aviation. So of course, I'm involved in education. I see that industry from both sides of the coin as a professor myself, but also, of course, as a student. I do spend most of my time in the private sector working for TCOM, and I'm starting to get back into government work as well. So again, as John mentioned, I started my foray into aviation working in the Beyond program for the FAA. Now I'm starting to work a little bit with the FAA, but a lot of kind of more military, federal government work as well. All of that being said, what I'm really passionate about is utilizing aviation in a capacity that can help move society in a positive direction. I'm very passionate about merging these evolutionary, groundbreaking technologies with somehow in just a little way making the world a bit of a better place. And over time, and it seems wild to even say it, but I've come to realize that the way I can best accomplish that goal is by looking into how we can utilize uncrewed aircraft in a way that pushes society in a positive direction. So before we really get into kind of the crux of this presentation, and I think that there's a lot to be had, especially when we're talking to subject matter experts, where discussion kind of leads this presentation. But before we do that, I do think we need to talk a little bit about some background, and we're going to start off by talking a bit about just beyond visual line of sight UAS ops overall. We're going to merge into kind of understanding, or at least laying out, the potential societal and economic benefits of uncrewed aircraft, and then we are going to define what exactly is a modern day smart city. And particularly when I'm talking to people outside of the industry, I think this is where I get a lot of eyes that gloss over. I was giving a presentation, I guess it was 2 months ago now. I was in Tennessee. And I was talking to a bunch of people and they were in aviation. They did not know a lot about the uncrewed sector. And I think as soon as I said smart city, their eyes glazed over and they said, this wild, crazy, young doctoral candidate is going to try and convince me that we're going to have the Jetsons zooming around in the near future. And that's not what I mean at all. In fact, I mean that smart cities, in my opinion, are, I guess, really foundational in nature in that they're not a conceptualization framework. They are kind of a finite entity. And I created a mechanism for defining what cities are termed smart cities. I think that discussion is a little bit kind of out of context for this particular presentation, but for reference, 19 of these cities can be found within the United States. 66 can be found within the EU. So before we dive in, I think it's important that we discuss this kind of mess of a title that I came up with here. And I think I was very proud of myself, and I think everyone should be a little proud of me here because this title at one point was maybe 3 or 4 times as long. I have like a very eidetic memory. As such, summarization is certainly not my strong suit. But let's start off with one particular part of that title, and that is the notion of systematic integration. And again, this is something that John alluded to a bit in the introduction here, and that is that systematic integration simply means we're operating in a regulatory structure that is really founded upon rules rather than waivers. I think that the current waiver-based system was certainly necessary. I think it was, again, foundational in nature. I see it as more of a stepping stone, however, than an end-all be-all solution. I think that a regulatory structure that operates like Part 91, 91K, 121, 135, even Part 137 with ag ops in the UA sector, I think that those sectors have a regulatory structure that is much more sustainable than what we have in the uncrewed sector, particularly with Part 107. So that's a long way to say when we're talking about systematic integration, simply talking about that rules-based regulatory structure. Now, complex airspaces, this really has nothing to do with anything airspace or aviation related. When I'm talking about complex airspaces, all I'm talking about is volumes of air that are adjacent to or directly above densely populated locales. Basically, the air that's above smart cities. The air that's above any cities, excuse me. And the final part I want to talk about here is societal and economic benefits. Why did I decide to investigate societal and economic benefits of UA integration when I could have chosen any components to investigate? Well, it all started lying in bed one night, and in the name of transparency, it's actually lying in bed every night because I'm one of those people who just, I can't ever seem to get my mind to turn off. Anyway, I started brainstorming, and this night I felt like I should be relatively useful. So I started brainstorming what components maintain the potentiality of catalyzing change in the most powerful and meaningful way possible. So I thought and I thought, and I came up with a list of about maybe 5, 6, 7 different contenders. And before I divulge those, I do want to remind you this was at 2 a.m. And no matter how much I like to think it, I don't think any human does their best work at 2 a.m. So they started off with proverbial buzzwords. The first was courage. Well, how can we really catalyze and maintain change if we're not courageous? I don't think that we are going to evoke meaningful change by staying in our comfort zones. I think that we have to step outside of those comfort zones and push the boundaries. And in order to do that, well, we have to act with courage. Next, we have to be consistent because there is no way that change is going to be maintained if we don't act consistently. It's pretty simple, right? We don't go to the gym, we don't gain muscle. We don't consistently diet, we're not going to lose weight. We don't consistently act in a positive manner in the aviation sector, change is not going to occur. And even more than that, it's not going to last. Then conviction, and conviction is one I actually like. So I think that it's really important that when we're kind of navigating this regulatory mess, if you will, whenever we kind of move in one direction, we fully dedicate ourselves to exploiting that direction completely. It does not matter whether the end result of that is some groundbreaking, revolutionary concept, or whether it's a dead end, because at that point we can kind of put that to bed and focus elsewhere. So in order to catalyze change, we have to act with conviction. And finally, clarity. If we're not acting in a clear mind, quite frankly, what are we really doing here? All of that being said, there was something very, very wrong with all of these, and that is that they were very abstract. They were not tactile, really in any sense of the word. Now, it wasn't until I Googled them, it was a couple of days later, that I came to find out that they were actually part of the big C's of change catalysts. And that is a real thing. Like, I did not make that up. You can all Google it. I think people think that is certainly one of the things that I'm fibbing about, but that is an actual thing. And if you need to know anything about me, it is that I absolutely hate gimmicky slogans like that. So naturally, we're going to wipe those out. Eventually, I came to think, and it really is pretty simple. What is capable of disrupting day-to-day life on the largest scale possible? Well, I'm not very into politics, but ask any politician. Societal and economic change are proverbial gold mines in any campaign. Figure out how to change society for the better. Hell, why not do it through some avenue like economic growth? And you, my friends, well, you are well on your way. So after that, we come up with an investigation into the societal and economic benefits of systematically integrating BVLOS ASOPs into complex airspaces. Now, as I'm sure we're all aware, the aviation industry, of course, is really perhaps the single most complex socioeconomic sector in existence today. And similarly, the United States domestic airspace is perhaps the most complex in the world. Now, these complexities, they were compounded, and the first compounding happened on September 28th, 2005. And on that date, the Federal Aviation Administration issued the first airworthiness certificate for a civil uncrewed aerial vehicle. Now, the increase in multiplicity, of course, continued. And this is a recurring theme that I have found with the FAA. And that continued and really climaxed with the introduction of 14 CFR 107 in the summer of 2016. And the last big event that I want to mention here happened on April 1st, 2019, and that was the issuance of the first Beyond Visual Line of Sight waiver. Now, I do think that as a result of regulatory ambiguity and political intricacies, the uncrewed industry has really become overly complex and certainly unnecessarily complex. And I think that it's really not only innately possible, but it is fundamentally realistic that significant and lasting societal and economic growth can be catalyzed through systematic integration of BVLOS ops into these complex urban airspaces. Kind of on the same idea, I propose that the current waiver-based system should be utilized really as a stepping stone rather than that end-all be-all kind of final solution. I believe that regulatory simplification is imminent and that it will occur as a result of transitioning to the rules-based system that I keep harping on about. Essentially, transitioning to that rules-based system will be able to provide a foundation for uncrewed aircraft to be utilized in a manner of catalyzing significant social and economic growth. Now, there are certainly a number of barriers that are going to have to be addressed in order for this system to become a reality. Certainly, I think that the most significant barrier is one that involves public perception. I foresee rather substantial concerns to be raised by the public, particularly with regard to safety and privacy, and particularly in regard to beyond visual line of sight operations. So, how do we address this issue? How do we let people know, particularly those that are not intimately familiar with the aviation sector, that there are safety redundancies in place, regulations can be utilized in a manner that keeps families safe while also kind of exploiting economic benefits of this up and coming aerospace sector. So I think that a much more comprehensive understanding of how BVLOS UAS ops are viewed in the eyes of course, industry experts, people who are familiar with aviation, but as I mentioned, also people from the general public, and in particular, people who are going to be living in this proposed IOD. So that's the Internet of Drones infrastructure, very similar to the IoT, Internet of Things infrastructure. And I think people who are living in those areas need to be consulted. We need to figure out how they feel in order to plot a path forward. And then finally, I think one of the really other most important things is trying to address concerns that crewed pilots have. And whenever I talk about this structure, particularly when we're talking BVLOS in urban environments, there are certain buzzwords, again, that come up. And the biggest one is probably see and avoid. Of course, in the uncrewed sector, we have DAA, detect and avoid technology. Those pilots certainly don't think that that's in a state where they would put their lives and their aircraft at risk flying in joined airspace between uncrewed and crewed vehicles. And I certainly don't think it's there either. I do think that that will eventually be in place, but we're not there yet. So why are we really even talking about this? Why does airspace integration matter? Well, Part 107 is inherently limiting. It certainly provides basic rules and regulations that all commercial uncrewed operators are going to have to follow. That being said, there are some gaping holes in the system, and one of these gaps manifests in the form of legislation governing these routine BVLOS operations. Now, I did recently have a conversation with Jonathan Rupert down in Florida, aviation attorney. I'm sure some of you are probably familiar with some of his work. He's relatively well known. And we were discussing Part 108, and he's fairly confident that a Part 108 is going to be introduced this year. First of all, I'm not a fan of the term Part 108. I think that a subreg Part 107B, kind of similar to how Part 91K and fractional ownership of aircraft operates under Part 91. I think that that would probably be a much more conducive regulatory environment, but we'll see what the FAA comes out with. I think he said by August the FAA was planning on releasing at least a press release about that Part 108. Nevertheless, currently we obviously operate under that waiver-based system. There are some flaws in that system, which I'm going to discuss next. And the process of acquiring one of these BVLOS waivers is as time-consuming as it is complex. There have been 147 successful beyond visual line of sight waivers filed. This is as of August of 23. So between the first waiver, when it was issued, which was in 2019 through 2023, we had 147 successful BVLOS waivers. And if we step back and think about that, on the surface, it doesn't sound that bad. I mean, it is a difficult waiver to get. It should be a difficult waiver to get based on the potential catastrophic consequences that could occur of a flight going wrong. So 147 really doesn't seem that terrible, especially when we're dealing with the red tape covered corridors of the FAA. However, what is an issue is that there is a 99% failure rate for proposed waivers. And I have personally filed, I'm not going to tell you how many I filed. There have been 4 successful waivers that I filed. The number of waivers that were unsuccessful is a number that is significantly greater than 4. Anyway, in an industry that covets efficiency, that 99% failure rate is really unacceptable. So next, we are going to talk about the efficiency issue. As I mentioned, all of aviation covets efficiency. Again, I was having a similar conversation. This was with my dissertation advisor, Dr. John Laufey out in Oklahoma. And we had a oddly complex conversation about how the current state of the UA regulatory landscape is too innately complex. Essentially, individuals operating in aviation as a whole that cannot operate efficiently are going to fail altogether. Ask any number of failed upstart regional airlines in the United States. It's very difficult to operate and be successful in aviation. There are wildly thin margins, but doing so in a manner that is not comprehensively efficient is almost impossible. So I think it's become increasingly clear for all of the reasons that I've mentioned so far that that rules-based system kind of has to manifest itself. Now, of course, these factors all become even more important when we're talking about operating in densely populated locales, because, of course, any failure of any aircraft system maintains the potentiality of being like very, very seriously catastrophic. Fatalities are not going to help our advocacy for sure. So we want to be very pointed in what we do, but we also want to try and push the technology and bring the regulations up to speed. Now, of course, how can we get the general public excited about this? How can we have them move from current transportation infrastructure to this kind of wild UTM, UAM, AAM infrastructure that we're going to talk about in a bit? Well, I mentioned it earlier, and societal and economic growth are really going to be the catalysts, hopefully, for that movement. So, whenever I begin any real research inquiry, whenever I begin really any project, I do think it's important to lay out on as granular a level as necessary what it is I'm trying to accomplish. So, of course, and as I mentioned before, this doesn't mean we always reach the end goal of what we meant to set out to accomplish. It's kind of the whole story of Post-it notes, right? A bunch of brilliant material scientists, best material scientists in the entire country. They got together and they're trying to create the world's strongest superglue. And they failed miserably, and instead they created a societal icon that is the Post-it notes, which my entire desk and wall is just covered with. So by going down a path that we think is the right way to move, may not turn out to be the right way, it may be a dead end, and we may solve the world's aviation problems. All of that being said, I have another slogan that I think is rather applicable here. And I've kind of tried to base my life around this, and that is, I think that the mark of a truly intelligent person is one who can explain a very, very complex topic and do it in a very, very simple way. And that was actually my grandfather who told me that. So I know at the beginning of this, I said I wasn't a huge fan of slogans, but I'm going to make an exception for him. So that certainly is something that I've tried to live my life by. And I'm hoping that this presentation will probably sum that notion up. So we have a couple of different questions, and these are four primary questions that I think we have to address. And I do think that this will help to move the industry in a positive direction. So first, we have to understand what regulatory framework is going to have to be put in place. And as we mentioned before, we're talking probably about a rules-based structure. At least that's what I'm proposing. Of course, there is going to be critical infrastructure in technology that first and foremost is going to have to be invented. It's going to have to be tested, and then it's going to have to be implemented and installed. This is physical infrastructure. I'm thinking of, I don't know, vertiports. So places where drones can land on top of a hospital building, delivering blood transfusions. There are no kind of real tactile examples of that infrastructure being successful. So I think that there's going to be a rather large failure rate, at least kind of at the beginning of that endeavor. The next question we have to look at is how can this integration catalyze and support social change? This is very important, yeah, sure, internally for us involved in aviation, but largely, I think it will get the general public more interested in how drones can be utilized in a positive capacity. And then what are those safety concerns? What are those privacy concerns? What are those security concerns surrounding enabling BVLOS flights in complex environments? Not really only that, but we have to figure out how we're going to address them kind of comprehensively from the ground up. And I think a relatively close parallel here would be asking ourselves how we can create a regulatory environment where a family decides to order their Friday pizza night delivery by drone rather than using these conventional methods that exist now, DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub. So essentially, when I was growing up, my family on Friday nights, we would always get together, sit on the couch, get in our pajamas, order pizza, and all watch a movie together. So if we can convince a family to order that pizza by drone, I think that that is kind of the first hurdle that we have to get over with regards to successfully implementing this system comprehensively throughout the country and throughout the world. Now, there are, of course, some assumptions that we have to acknowledge. This is, I mean, I think it's one of the most important things when we're developing kind of a research plan. The aviation industry, of course, is wildly complex. The uncrewed sector is certainly far from immune to these complexities. Now, we have a couple of assumptions here, and I'm going to outline 4 of them briefly. The first is that we're going to have to assume that the historical rate of technological advancements in the uncrewed aviation sector are going to be maintained into the future. Essentially, in the uncrewed sector, technology evolves extremely quickly, and there really is no reason to believe that pace will moderate at any time in the future. The second assumption we have here is that BVLOS regulations are going to continue to advance. That Part 107 that I said was so restrictive earlier, it is really a purposefully living and breathing document. It is designed to inherently mature. As technologies change, as opinions change, then regulations can also evolve as well. The third assumption is that society is going to become more comfortable with the idea of drones zooming around their houses, flying above their cars when they're driving down the road, flying up to their windows on top of buildings at work, particularly when they're working in an urban environment. I think a decent parallel here is that self-driving cars, just a couple of years ago, you would have not caught me dead in one of those cars. Just yesterday, I was sitting in my buddy's Tesla, and he purchased the wildly expensive self-driving package. I think it was $8,000 for that add-on. And it is the coolest thing. I mean, the detail in that technology is wild. And I think that a lot of that technology is directly applicable to the drone industry. And I think that it's kind of a great template that maybe we in the drone industry can utilize. And we have one final assumption is this is really rather simple, and it is that cities are going to continue to evolve technologically into true smart cities capable of supporting a multitude of simultaneous routine BVLOS operations, both in the UTM, UAM, and AAM capacities. Now, I have one final foundational component that I think will guide the crux of our little interactive activity we're going to walk through in a moment. And that component manifests as the IESE Cities in Motion Index. The IESE Index, for those who aren't familiar, was essentially created to provide a framework over in Spain. The IESE is actually the business school for the University of Navarra in Navarra, Spain. And it addresses and grades cities based on really a multitude of different dimensions. The index, again, it was really created to help policymakers initially. It kind of migrated over to businesses taking note and utilizing it. And now it has become kind of a real foundational component with regards to stakeholders in aviation. It helps us determine kind of the strengths and weaknesses of different cities. And the one thing that I think is great about the uncrewed sector and urban mobility in particular is that we're not operating in a vacuum. I mean, there are a ton of different efforts that are occurring throughout the world. I spent a lot of time dealing with the Transportation Authority over in Singapore. They had a really incredible 3-year kind of test run that developed into almost a fully functional BVLOS integrative infrastructure in one of the world's most complex cities. Some of that technology is absolutely incredible, and I could certainly teach probably an entire course on everything that they did in Singapore. But basically, we can utilize what they did in Singapore. We can figure out what they're doing over in Munich, and we can bring that into the United States. We don't have to always operate in a vacuum. We don't always have to do something revolutionary. We can copycat others that are being successful in other areas of the world. Now that index, it was first introduced in 2012. It has, of course, kind of adapted as it has matured. And I don't want to go into a ton of detail here, but some of the parameters that cities are judged on include economic performance. So we're talking about GDP, employment rates, business environments. We're talking about human capital. So this is going to measure things like level of education, workforce skills, health of a population in general. Social cohesion, which I think is sometimes gets the tag of being a bit abstract, but I think is something that can really fundamentally help this effort moving forward. We as humans, of course, we're very social beings. We like to be part of a group. I mean, it's probably one of the reasons we're all here right now. So this social cohesion parameter is designed to assess components to include income distribution, social inclusion, safety of a given city, distribution of safe neighborhoods even within that city. We talk about environment and sustainability, of course. This focuses on things like environmental policies, green spaces, distribution of green spaces. Are these green spaces in areas that are wealthier? Are they distributed throughout the city? Do we just have one giant green space, aka Central Park? Or are they distributed, again, relatively evenly throughout the city? I think another interesting one they talk about here is urban farming. So, like green roofs, having gardens within your apartment, within the city. They also talk about mobility and transportation, governance and economy, and I'm not really going to go into a lot more detail there. But again, these are the 19 cities that appear on that list. There are a significantly greater number of cities that are IESE rated in the European Union. So I think we can definitely do a little work there. Now we have a little bit of fun. I could, of course, have chosen one of these cities as the backdrop to our investigation. However, I don't think that seems super fun. So instead, I chose one of my kind of newly minted favorite cities, and that is the city of Memphis, Tennessee. I was down here. Again, it was a couple of months ago, probably 2 months ago at this point, giving a speech at the University Aviation Conference. And I have to say, Memphis barbecue is absolutely delicious. And we have some little cumulus clouds we're going to put in there for fun. And what would a presentation be without, oops, do I have you guys still? Hello?
I hear you.
We're good. We're
Oh,
good.
Yeah, this is inspiring.
Okay. Hold on. I don't know why I froze up then.
Are you having technical
All right.
difficulties,
Yeah,
Jonathan?
I was, but I think I'm good now.
Okay.
Anyway, what good would the presentation be without a little disclaimer? So we got to get that in there, and that is that the following airspace stratification depictions, they are certainly not to scale. Frozen again. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I want to talk about kind of how I propose to integrate these aircraft into urban airspace. And we're going to start kind of pretty broad. We're going to get more and more granular as we move on. So the first thing we're going to talk about is, where do we think drones are going to fly? Well, for the purposes of this kind of initial integration exercise, we're going to call this low airspace, a low altitude UTM. So it's going to be managed by a UTM network. This is the manned equivalent of air traffic control. So it's the uncrewed traffic management network. And this I'm not super excited about, but for the purposes of this discussion, we are going to cap that at 400 AGL. Of course, we have some serious issues with that 400 AGL altitude cap. The biggest one, you guys would have in New York City, of course, would be the fact that you have many, many, many buildings significantly taller than 400 feet. So if we cap this UTM managed infrastructure, how are we going to land on the top of a building for a delivery that is over 400 feet tall? If anybody has any suggestions, I would very much welcome those because haven't come up with that one yet. So we have a couple drones here, and as you can see, they're flying around and they're staying within their UTM managed infrastructure. However, they're not very organized within that body there. Keep that in mind. We're going to come back to that in a bit. Next, we have this UAM. So this is the Urban Air Mobility Traffic Management Card, or think air taxis, urban air mobility vehicles. This, again, kind of air taxi, advanced, maybe self-driving, maybe piloted, not sure yet, traffic management card. And this is going to occur currently from between 500 AGL up to roughly 6,500 AGL. Now, that's all well and good. There are some complexities that manifest themselves here. However, and the biggest one is, of course, we have to share this airspace with a lot of crude traffic. So we have a couple Augusta 109s flying around here. I'm up in my little Cessna 195 flying around, taking in the Memphis sites. And this is really large in Europe. So there's a big discussion between, do we want to integrate or do we want to segregate? Do we want to segregate UAM vehicles from traditional crewed aircraft? Do we want to segregate drones from UAM, from crewed aircraft? It's really, quite honestly, there are a ton of different permutations we could go through there. But personally, I think that a segregative airspace is probably the way to go initially, moving into a more integrative structure in the future. Again, that's kind of all up in the air at this point. Next, this is above 6,500 AGL on this for this presentation. I do think that the floor of this kind of red section here is probably going to be pushed up to flight level 180. So we're talking Class A airspace there, where we have kind of our commercial aircraft. These are cargo aircraft, transport aircraft. So those IFR-ATS managed airspace. And above flight level 600, we have that upper class E, which honestly, I'm not going to talk about a lot because it doesn't really apply here. We could stretch and say that sure, TCOM has a couple of weather balloons that fly up that high, but I have no experience with them and can't really talk about them. So we're talking about weather balloons, solar drones, things like that up in that class E. So we've identified one major issue, and that is that we need to get a little bit more granular. We're organized kind of very broadly here. We need to organize now within each of these segments. So the first thing we're going to look at, we're going to start with the UAM traffic management corridor. And I have this one currently broken up, and it's broken up by direction of travel. So every aircraft, for instance, traveling south is going to operate in a certain altitude range. I don't know what those ranges are yet. I also am not exactly sure how we're going to get aircraft up into those corridors. Let's get some other aircraft in here now. Because having to share these aircraft or share this airspace with crewed aircraft, of course, makes everything much more complex. It's very difficult for a crewed pilot to see even, a DJI 600, M600. It's difficult for them to see, I'm sure, some of the drones that I fly here. When compared to, obviously, manned aircraft, drones are incredibly small. So we have to figure out, how are we going to share this airspace? How are we all going to get along? All right, and we have here our urban air mobility vehicle. It is traveling south, and it's popping along, but now it wants to change direction, right? So how do we safely have this aircraft change direction? How do we have it move from that southbound direction to the westbound direction while transgressing through that eastbound direction with a whole bunch of other aircraft in there? Of course, we can't go busting through the floor of that southbound airspace. So we are going to introduce a system of nodes. These nodes are going to be predetermined geographical locations. Our aircraft can then transgress that eastern direction, move from the south to the west, and kind of mosey on along. Now, I'll take a second here to make this note, and that is that, of course, this is in 3 dimensions. I tried to create this depiction in 3 dimensions, and I spent the better part of like 3 or 4 hours yesterday trying to get it into 3 dimensions, and it's not feasible. It's an absolute mess. So I kind of got rid of that. All that being said, the way that I came up with the whole node concept is that, I guess it was I was probably in middle school. There was a science fair, and I thought it would be a pretty cool project to build this 3-dimensional elevator. So this elevator was for an apartment complex, and apparently this apartment complex was for the world's laziest people. They didn't want to go up to their floor and have to walk down a corridor, because who would want to do that? Instead, they want to get in an elevator, and this elevator is going to take them up to their floor. It's going to mosey along on tracks, I guess, down the hallway, and it's going to take them right to their apartment door. So I created this structure. I thought it was pretty cool at the time. It was with kind of PVC pipes and these big plastic sheets. There's a pretty cool enzyme you could throw on this plastic sheet. It would chemically melt the plastic, and you could basically build the frame of a building from there. Bent up a little some stainless steel, I guess it was stainless, some kind of metal, sheet metal, into a little kind of a cube. Turned out to be, the elevator cart, and then some electromagnets would, pull it in all of these different dimensions. All that being said, little blast from the past, and that's initially where I came up with the idea of nodes. So now that we're in this AAM vehicle here on the left side of the screen, and we want to land on, I guess it's that kind of bluish building there in the background. So we have to figure out how to do that. Similar to the issue with kind of moving through that eastbound airspace earlier when we went from south to west. Here we're going to have to transgress through this 100-foot vertical separation barrier through this UTM managed infrastructure. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to carve out some airspace, and I kind of came up with the term UAM vertiport. I like to think before the term UAM vertiport actually became a legitimate term. I don't exactly know the order of events there, but we have vertiports. And in these specific locations, we can then safely move through this UAM managed airspace. Of course, there are some massive complications here. If we thought that moving from that southbound direction to that westbound direction in that UAM traffic management corridor was complex, well, this one's much more complex. And the main complexity here manifests from the fact that the way I have this planned out is that the UAM traffic management corridor is managed by a completely different entity than the UTM traffic management corridor. So there has to be some kind of communication that occurs between these different entities. It would be nice to say, oh, we already have air traffic control. Why can't air traffic control take care of drone and urban air mobility as well? Well, they're already pretty swamped with taking care of all the commercial and general aviation flights out there. So it's not reasonable for us to think that, okay, well, we're just going to throw it on them. So this, of course, is relatively broad. But for now, we're going to leave the UAM traffic management corridor. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what we're going to do with this UTM traffic management space. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to segregate it. And as you notice here, this kind of north, south, east, west directionality is kind of tucked up towards the ceiling of that UTM managed airspace. And after I created this, I kind of thought that actually makes a little more sense. So I'd like you to kind of imagine what I have there in that UTM airspace, how that directionality is tucked towards the ceiling of the airspace there, and kind of apply that to the UAM traffic management corridor as well. So now we have our drone. It's flying, it's moving west. This drone just came from the University of Memphis. It's carrying that blood for that blood transfusion. This is at the St. Mark's Hospital in downtown Memphis. So how is that blood going to get down to that building? Well, it's going to do the same thing. This time we have UAS vertiports, not to be confused with the big brother of the vertiport world, the UAM vertiport. So this is kind of the very basic regulatory structure that I'm proposing. Now, of course, this is first and foremost, I don't think going to happen in the next decade. I think we're looking realistically at 15 to 20 years before we have any system remotely similar to this. And I'm sure that that system will look absolutely nothing like this because technologies next year are going to be wildly different than what they are this year. So who knows what it's going to be 15 years down the road. But I think as long as we're, again, pushing forward in the right direction, doesn't matter whether that direction turns out. It doesn't matter whether we have some groundbreaking discovery. As long as we're moving, we're not staying still and stagnant. I think that progress is being made, and I can sleep at night. So these are a couple of different components that John and I discussed prior to my creation of this presentation here. And I think that a lot of these different components, they can really apply very directly to that previous slide. Of course, the future of autonomous aerial vehicles and UA integration largely is going to revolve around technological challenges. Biggest technological challenge, both from a technology standpoint and from a regulatory standpoint, is that DAA technology, that detect and avoid technology. How are we going to be able to replace a pilot's ability to sit in a 737, look out the window, and avoid an imminent obstacle? Of course, DJI has come out with some great sensors for this. TCOM is developing some sensors. I've done some work on the side, developing a couple of different sensors. And I'll be blunt, mine were huge failures. But again, we're moving in the right direction, so I'll take that as a plus. I do think that the acceleration of the adoption of autonomous drones will be catalyzed by that technological evolution, but I think the rate of regulatory evolution has to step up. And that I don't know how, I really don't know how it will happen. One of the reasons that I left the FAA is because I was becoming very, very frustrated. And I was actually having a relatively significant capacity on my quality of life in that I wasn't able to really evoke change in any meaningful capacity. And I don't know whether that was an issue with the structure of the Beyond program in particular, because when I was there, it was kind of the movement from that IPP program, the integration pilot program, to the Beyond program, and there were some administrative issues there, or whether that is just the FAA landscape in general. So after we kind of deal with that technology side, this is, I think, really important with regard to getting public acceptance, and that is future-proofing businesses in the uncrewed sector. And I would almost take out that uncrewed sector portion of that number 2 there, because I think that uncrewed aircraft really should start to be utilized and looked at by the general public as, first off, tools, not toys, but even more than that, tools rather than aircraft. I think that they should be looked at as a vessel for change. And I think that is kind of one thing that Part 107 pilots, particularly the students that I teach in college, they don't really understand. They think that you're going to get this Part 107 license and you're going to graduate from college, you're going to have a job, you know, making significant amount of money. And that's really not the uncrewed landscape. Yeah, if you have your ATP and you have 1,500 flight hours, you'll probably get a job at a regional airline, maybe fly under 135 at NetJets or FlexJets. But the fact that the ceiling, the floor, I suppose, is so low in the uncrewed sector, that barrier to entry is pay $175, whatever it is, and take an 80-question test and you have yourself a license. I think that structure really necessitates us to think a little bit further and how we can utilize these drones in a way to help current businesses streamline their model, future-proof their model, and expedite business growth. And then, of course, is the issue of the regulatory challenges. And there are massive regulatory hurdles facing companies working with autonomous aerial systems, and I see that every single day. Unfortunately, some are going to have rather unfortunate consequences. I have had aircraft that were bound for delivery at 9 a.m. The night before at 9 p.m. doing one final checkout, crash into the roof. And unfortunately, the client dropped that contract, but it was certainly better than us delivering that aircraft and having it crash in downtown Washington, D.C. So I think that navigating those regulatory challenges is important. I don't think that that discussion is going to garner really as much, I guess, media attention, press. I don't think it's going to garner much attention from the general public as that future-proofing business models, because that has a real tactile benefit to it. So that actually is all I have for you all today. I don't actually know how long that lasted. That was a little quicker.
It's good. No, you were pretty on
Oh.
time. Thank you.
Well, there we go.
We're going to open up a question and answer, but you were asking about the 400-foot rule, basically. But the
Yes.
400-foot rule based on 107, at least when I took it, and tell me out there if that's changed.
Yeah.
Here's an example. If you have a 1,200-foot structure,
Yeah.
you are in 400 feet radius of that structure and 400 feet above that structure. So
Yes.
your maximum altitude of your drone from the ground at that point is 1,600 feet, and you are legal. Now,
Absolutely.
looking at your complexity of UAM and UTM, and we have tall buildings out there, things are going to change, and I don't know if that rule will be able to be in effect when UTM and, or UAM is in full swing. So I see things, possibly changing and rules changing even from a 107 level as this thing matures.
Sure. Yeah. I guess the main issue that I have found, particularly again with that 400-foot rule, is that say we have a building that it's 400 feet tall. We could operate, as long as we're within a 400-foot radius of that building, up to 800 feet.
Right.
The issue is that 800 feet pushes up through that 100-foot vertical separation buffer into that UAM traffic management corridor. So managing that barrier, I guess, is going to be the primary issue, maybe, but there are certainly going to be other issues that manifest out of that as well. That's why Memphis was such a great city to use for this depiction, because they don't have very many tall buildings. So there we go.
So Jennifer locked into a couple of things. Jennifer, you would like to comment on what you see?
Yeah, absolutely. So Jonathan, the first thing is that I really appreciate that you're a professor and that you're asking such great questions to students to have them think about scenarios and also like the bigger picture. I really appreciate that. The one particular slide that caught my eye was the one based on the smart city rankings. I don't know if you can
Yep.
quickly put that back. And I think I'm sure that I love that you kind of talked about like well-being and being part of a structure and being part of the future are kind of painful, right? And I would love a data point for AUVSI leadership when they think about resources across the nation. AUVSI is a lean membership organization, and they don't always allocate resources. The way that resources are allocated, I'm sure has protocol, but I would love this smart city data to inform as well where resources go for AUVSI. Because looking at New York being second in that, with, as you know, the airports that we have, any ideas on how we can inform our leadership about using just additionally increasing the use of IESE rankings in our decision making as a resource nationally?
Absolutely. I have a report that I will put in the chat here that I think would be pretty useful for that. I guess the one kind of pushback that I've had with the IESE ranking. I guess particularly with the people who are a little dissociated with industry. So generally these professors, they don't like that it started in Spain. They think that because it's first and foremost, it's in Spain, and second, there are 33, no, excuse me, that was my ranking. There are a multitude of cities. I don't know how many are in Europe. And there are only 19 in the US that ranking is somehow skewed towards European market. And I've done a ton of research on it. I've been following it, I guess, for maybe 9 years now. And I don't get that feeling. I think that's kind of a knee-jerk reaction by a lot of the United States-based industry professionals, but I will definitely pull this report up and send it on your way.
Well, I think whether or not other people agree, to me, it's a body of knowledge that I think will make all of us more informed as we consider, what is a smart city? What does it look like? And then also, how do we begin to allocate resources, or can it be part of a justification of a request for resources? So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and let us know, Jonathan, when you're speaking, especially in New York, places like that locally. We could let people know. You're very studious, and you're looking at a point of view of highly educated person, okay, and which is good. And we need a balance of people with real experience in this world and highly educated people to really come together and really meet and figure out what UTM and what everything else means coming in the future, because the technology is not stopping for anyone. That we know, because these guys know who got the big bucks. They're going to cash in one day, and they're going to force the issue. We know that. We all know it. Are we ready? That's the point. And as you know, there are different countries out there that are way ahead of us in this regard. And we need to be competitive in the marketplace. So, I think what you offer is a good studious point of view. There's no doubt about that in my mind. And, and good luck with everything you do. And we certainly here support you in your endeavors, and keep it going. Of course, we'll record this and get it out to you all. Are there any other questions for Jonathan right now? I know he's going to stay on until we're done, which we really appreciate. But anybody would like to just ask a question that they might have written down for Jonathan at this time?
May I just make a comment?
Sure, Nadia.
So I'm literally a layperson peeking behind the curtain, and this was so educational for me. It really shed a lot of light on the inner workings. And, obviously I wasn't going into this and looking at this industry saying, oh, just buzz it by, I had already done some extensive reading. But certainly if this is anything similar to your classes, I mean, this would be a good trailer version, like a movie of your work.
Oh, I
So
like that.
thank you. Thank you very much. This was really got me thinking a lot, even, from my perspective about the work that could be done, that needs to be done. So thank you. And John,
Yeah.
thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, and I would like to touch base on everything you talked about at the beginning, before everybody else jumped on. So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Good,
I'm going to
thank
put my email in
Yeah.
the chat for you.
okay, perfect.
Thanks.
Jason?
Hey, Jonathan, Jason Anderson here. Really interesting presentation, by the way. Thank you for your time tonight. Got a question for you. So my background is in meteorology. I'm a meteorologist currently at the National Weather Service, but I've been working in the drone industry 10 years now. And, one of the big things, is the public perception, the safety challenge we've got to get over. And obviously people are concerned about weather. Not just from the operator's standpoint of the efficiency and the reliability to launch and run operations on a daily, hourly basis, but the public, thinks, calls us yahoos goofballs that we can't even tell them whether they need an umbrella or, how windy it's going to be in the afternoon. Anything in your work or research here about, what's needed in terms of the industry to really take off and be safe and reliable? I mean, I'm working with the Weather Service now, and, we're supporting FAA and such, but we know we can't manage this. We're going to be a data source to these providers, but we can't be the authority on this. Commercial weather wants to get in there, but they're worried about, sustainability and profitability for them. So, I mean, how do you see that evolving in terms of making sure this all is safe and reliable from both a public and a commercial standpoint? If you don't mind commenting.
Sure, it's a good question. The one thing I can say for certainty is that weather is a massive issue for uncrewed aircraft. I have spent the last 8 days on hold, not being able to fly, simply because the winds were too strong, and the winds were
Right.
not been that strong.
And it can still be a clear sunny day. As I used to say to customers, I said, it's the invisible threat. You walk out of your building, your ops center, and it looks beautiful outside. And then 300 feet above your head, the winds are just impossible.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've had a drone fall out of the sky, sort of operator error, but certainly didn't look at the weather forecast when that happened. And I don't have a great answer for you on that. I think that could be really a completely new dissertation that we could
What comes
team
to
up on right there. But
Jonathan, what comes to mind is technology.
Yeah.
Okay. The drones that are out there today, all right, they have limitations. There's no doubt about it. Okay. And the drones that don't have limitations that can fly in hurricanes are way outpriced for anybody to even discuss, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
there's got to be some sort of balance between our needs and what manufacturers are willing to gamble on to get aircraft that can fly in a hurricane.
Yeah.
And I've seen it. I've seen it. I've seen on the trade floor twice. A company out of Germany that's absolutely going ahead and creating a incredible vehicle that it's basically there's a moving joint on every part of that structure, which moves and keeps that particular aircraft in high winds. So there are companies out there
Right.
that are actually trying to tackle this problem.
John, I'll tell you though, I was at the National
Hold
Hurricane.
on, Jason.
Sorry.
When those two meet, right?
Mhm.
When those two meet, I think there will be some success. But when that will happen, I have no idea.
And John, I was going to comment, I was at National Hurricane Center 2 weeks ago for the wrap up of the season. Those drones exist, but they're almost military aircraft in a way. And it's not that they can't be built and brought into this industry. It's the cost limitation. And you know that better than anyone. So it's when do we hit that pivot point of cost and scale and need? What you need for a drone in Memphis may not be what you need for a drone in New York or a drone in LA. And so it's about designing these platforms in such a way that have the sustainability needed in that environment or where you're going to take it to. And John, I think this goes back, like you said, this is another dissertation, maybe multiple dissertations about weather data and the platforms themselves. It's something that I think the industry is aware of. How we're going to solve it, I don't think anyone's quite sure of yet.
Yeah, I don't think there's a comprehensive solution, right? Because I mean, looking at that list, I mean, drones flying in Austin, Texas are certainly not going to be experiencing the same weather as those flown in Chicago, Illinois. So I don't have an answer. Can't even work one up.
That's
Right,
okay.
but
I was
again,
curious
we
to hear
gotta
your
keep-
thoughts.
It's just, Jonathan, keep your eyes on the technology. This is a good, AUVSI is a good place for you. And start really meeting some of these people on your journey and what they're trying to create. And then it'll be like Jason said, there are companies out there. And, the question is, okay, how are you going to bring this to market that's affordable? What's your plan? What do you need? Is it grants? Is it this? Is it that? You got to start talking to these people and figuring out where that money's coming from. If they say, well, we got it and we're in, okay, they've got to prove that point. We don't know that yet. We don't know who those players really are. At least I don't.
Yeah, and I don't even know if they exist yet, to be honest. Could be an up and coming company that comes up with some solution.
Yep. So I just say keep your eyes open, Jonathan, because when these things start fitting the solution, our business grows and more people, young people have jobs. And that's what we're really thinking about. Having people like your age really pioneer this stuff. There's some of us on this are aging out, right? You guys got to keep going, and you've got to bring in new blood and help the young kids and pave the way for young kids and our future scientists to answer these questions. So, keep up the great work.
You mentioned Germany. If any of you guys are in Nuremberg, Germany in February, I'm going to be talking at the AUVSI EU conference there. So
You might run into these people.
yeah.
Yeah. Jonathan, let me know.
Yeah.
Let me know what you find out there. I'd be very, very interested.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting for sure.
Yeah. Oh, there's no doubt.
John, do you want to just tell people about continuity and how we can help make sure people have a way to get the word out to help support Jonathan, and also our website?
Yes, the list that I have, that I believe there's 176 people I sent this to. They'll all get it. Hopefully they'll put it out to others. You'll get it, Jonathan, and we'll put it on our website, like you saw the other. I took him through the tour of our website, Jennifer, that you helped so greatly put together. And I think you were impressed, weren't you?
That website looks really good. I mean, I've seen some other AUVSI websites, and yours is by far the best. So
Thank
thank
you.
It's a
So we're trying up here.
awesome.
George, if you're still with us, how are you today?
I'm doing good. Been listening. Very interesting subject. I think the challenges with all this are tremendous. Trying to make a framework, to government agencies, it's going to take a long time to get there. It's going to take a long time for them to update it, because of the speed of technology is going to outpass whatever frameworks they build. I think it's a huge challenge what we're talking about here. And, ships sink in bad weather, planes fall out of the sky in bad weather. So I think we got to pay attention to the planes and the ships right now. So everybody, good luck. Have a happy Thanksgiving. That's all I got to say.
Thanks, George. Anybody else? I see S. Feller on there. Any comments?
Steve
Steve,
Feller.
right. There's Steve Feller. That's right.
Yeah, that's me. Sorry, I'm driving, so you're not going to get to see my face. But
It's okay.
yeah, I think it was an interesting conversation. I'm going to probably send some emails offline to follow up. I'm curious about, I'm aware of research by multiple government agencies looking into this at various levels, whether it's as a mathematical problem or an implementation detail or whatever else. And so I'm just curious about what agencies and organizations need to be pulled together to make this happen, and how we see that unfolding.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think that if you asked nearly anybody, even in my close circle of friends, that they would all jump to the FAA, and yeah, that certainly is going to be obviously the main player here. But I think a lot of technology, whether you like it or not, really evolves out of the military. So the Department of Defense is certainly someone that, first of all, they have a lot of means, right? I mean, they have money. So I think that looking towards the military probably isn't a terrible place to start.
So it's interesting that you say that, because our leader, Michael Robbins, is military. And
really?
yes, he does. And he does a lot with the DOD. There are some chapters out there trying to pull him back more into commercial, but it's being explained to me the way, one of the reasons why San Diego was so DOD centric, because there's a lot of DOD there.
Yeah.
It made sense. And, as they move from state to state, you'll see different flavors and what's strong in that environment. So it was explained to me. It's not like he's, taken off by commercial. No, it was really, location. And that was some trade show floor did you get to go to that?
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah. So you see about the DOD, it was, just a quick comment. I really appreciated the people there, and my family is military. And every time I asked a question to the marketing person, who usually I was directed to, was, why are you doing this? And they said, to save lives, our own boys in the field. And I said, God bless you. That's the answer. That's what I was looking for. And I just wanted to see if they were all on the same page. And every one of them had the same answer. And I did not prompt them to say that.
Yeah,
So,
that's-
you know, so what you're saying is from that technology, okay, it can trickle down to us, but we have to have people in those positions to say, hey, it's time. It's, you know, we need that communication. You know, could Michael Robbins be one of those communicators? Well, we'll see. You know, we'll see what happens in time. I hope he is, and I hope AUVSI is the way is could be that platform. And strong on both sides. So, you know, we'll see. I know that's their direction, and that's where they want to be. So.
I mean,
I guess I'd like to follow up on my question. The FAA, I think, is the regulatory body that will implement it, but they generally don't have a lot of research funding.
Well,
and so then the question is do you envision it more? I understand the DoD side too. I'm very familiar with what they're doing with drones, but they're generally not looking at these cooperative environments in this way. I know of some NASA research. So I guess
I think, Steve, this is the job of like an organization like AUVSI to really bring people together. I feel that's their business, and they must do this on all ends, from DoD to commercial, you know, and all the avenues. If they say they got their hand in it, then they got to play their card. So that's what I'm reaching out, and we're talking to Michael Robbins about. Matter of fact, our next speaker in January will be Michael Robbins. Steve, I hope you can join us with that one, because there's going to be a lot of questions raised that day. And I'm hoping he brings his posse with him. So I can't wait for that. I can't wait for that. So, Jonathan, I hope you're there. Hope everybody on this call is there. You'll certainly get an email. And in the beginning of January, that's when I'm going to start talking to him about really putting together a great presentation. Hopefully, we can then parlay that into who's going to be our next board member or president or VP of AUVSI. And if we can usher those two together in January, boy, it's a home run. So I just want to say that. I'm reminding everybody that the moving on announcement has been announced at September 24th, that we are looking for a new board. Aaron Pierce have been very helpful so far. So have Jeff Radcliffe. Jeff Radcliffe was our former representative on the national board, and now Aaron Pierce is the current advisor and our spokesman on the national board. And both of them have come to our aid. I want to say that. And there's a new person. I think, Jennifer, you know the person we're talking about. Andrew Carter seems to be interested in resilience.
Yeah,
I mean, if you could say a little bit about what you know about him would be helpful right now.
Well, just that Resilience as a company has just done a remarkable job of getting industry and government together and getting grants to really help coordinate, you know, communication systems, particularly creating kind of a modern day airport simulations. I think it's really important that we have a balance of industry leaders and CEOs. So from an industry expertise perspective, I think he would be incredible.
Yep. Thank you. That one more thing. The other candidate seems to be interested. He got back to me today. Was Cliff Kane from the Edelgas company out of Wall Street. Here's a company that is looking to get into this business because what do they sell? One of their gases is helium, and helium is used to build our structure. I don't know if anybody knows this, but helium is used for semiconductor use. Helium is used for drone use directly. So he feels there's a place for him in this business, and I welcome him. I'm not sure if he's throwing his hat in yet. We yet to discuss. But anybody who does throw in the hat, Jen, expect a couple of meetings offline, you know, with you, Scott, and George, and making sure we do have the right fit. But thanks to Aaron and Jeff, we have a start. I just want to say that.
That's exciting.
So is there anything I'm missing?
I think you're good.
Well, it's almost 9 o'clock. If we're good, I think we're good to say goodnight. And Jonathan, please keep in touch.
Absolutely.
We need great people like you.
I really appreciate all you letting me come on here and invade your meeting a little bit. I'm definitely going to be staying in touch, and I'll definitely be here next month. I think it's going to be a pretty cool meeting, so pretty psyched about
Great.
that.
Actually, in January.
I'll be there in January.
In January, yes. We're taking
Yeah.
off December. It's every,
Yeah.
oh, what it is, it's every other month. The
Yeah,
last Tuesday in the month. So
You did
they're
say
like
that.
every other month. If you just keep that a record, it's going to happen. Okay.
it's going on my calendar right now.
And what I like to see in the next regime to start putting out live events. That's that's like the next phase of our chapter is
Yeah, that'd
having
be-
the clout to put on live events. So hopefully our next wave of leaders can help us with that. So that's what we're approaching.
I think the Georgia chapter is doing some pretty good live stuff down there at this point.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
is the
Yeah.
Innovation Day, maybe I think they have. I don't
Yeah,
know.
Lamar's doing great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lamar is a friend of mine. We talk
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we had Adrian Doku, who's in Texas. So I think in terms of like our coverage and how we get distribution is Georgia, Texas, and that New England. And it really is like most things, it's really the leaders of those chapters really drive the momentum, but there's a lot. And as you know, all of you, Exponential next year, I believe in May is going to be in Texas.
That's right.
So,
And Doku has many surprises for us for sure.
yes, yeah,
I tell you, he's a great force in this business. He's also become a friend. I can say these people are friends, and because we get to talk, and I learn a lot from them all the time. So, Jonathan, just come right in, join the crowd.
I'll
I
be here.
think you'll enjoy the ride.
Absolutely.
okay, that's great.
All good, guys. Thank you so much.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Yeah. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Cheers.
Stay
Safe
well.
Happy
travel.
holidays all.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.